filling in, interrupting a series that Jeremy and them are doing. But we're going to be in Luke 9 if you want to flip your Bibles. Otherwise, the words will be on the screen here, the text. And the title of tonight, if I title as anything, is from what the disciples will say, shall we call fire down from heaven? Or shall we send fire down from heaven? Who knows what that's about? Anybody recall this? If you don't recall this, good. We're going to learn about it tonight. So look at the next slide if we can here. Jesus sends out the 12 disciples. We looked at this, we were looking at a sermon last Sunday about Jesus allowing the disciples, commissioning them to go out into Gentile areas, and he said you could take swords. And I read this to show that when they went to Jewish areas, they were safe. So I want to show you the commissioning of the disciples before we get to the text tonight. So Jesus sends out the 12 disciples. Luke 9, 1 through 6. This is just setting up the stage for our text tonight. And he, Jesus, called the 12 together, and he gave them power and authority over all demons to cure diseases, and he sent them out to proclaim the kingdom of God and to heal. Now, he gave them authority, and when he sent them out, the word is apostle, right? Apostoli is the Greek word apostle, one who is sent. He has 12 disciples. A disciple is a learner, a student who sits at the master's feet. An apostle is one who is sent. So those same 12 disciples, minus Judas, who kills himself, those same disciples, after the resurrection, now take the title of apostle. They've gone from students to going out into the world. Now, the idea of apostle is an Old Testament concept. The shehulah or the shelakim, there's different words for this, but the same concept is in place, as one who goes as a representative authority of someone else. So in the ancient world, and even today, if you're a president or sitting in a position of authority, maybe you can't go to all the other places in the world to visit, but so you have a diplomat, an ambassador from your country who takes with you a message, and he's given you authority. You know, when we have authorities come from other countries here to, say, from Saudi Arabia or South Korea, or we have diplomats come to visit our country, they will have certain authority from their nations. They have authorities given to them to hold those duties while they're here. And they might have immunity from certain crimes. You ever heard of diplomatic immunity? You've heard of that. It's very controversial because sometimes those folks here in our country might be exempt from some of our laws, which can create some sticky legal situations, but that's a side note. Going back to the ancient world, when people were sent out on behalf of a king, they had authority. Jesus sends out the 12 disciples. At this point, he sends them out on a trial run as apostles to go into neighboring villages to begin to prepare the way for the Messiah who's coming to their town. The best way of thinking about this is back years ago when Billy Graham was doing those big crusades, he did them for 60 years, those big crusades, he would send ahead of him these team members who'd go out and they would secure a venue, a location to preach. They would secure the music, all the things. The Billy Graham crusade, and they'd go on these crusades, would have these things in place before. He didn't do a lot of that, right? He had people that did this stuff for him. They would go before him into towns and cities, and they would secure the place of where the worship was to be held, get any guest speakers with the crusade, all that sort of stuff is taken care of. Jesus sends out the 12 disciples ahead of him to prepare the towns for his coming. And he would say, they would be there before him, he would show up and they're ready to meet the Messiah. That's how it was supposed to work. So the first question is, Jesus' disciples were his authoritative representatives. That's a fact. And the question is, how are we Christ's authoritative representatives on earth? How are we all functioning as apostles on earth? We don't hold the office of apostle, but how are we ones who are sent?
Well, we're supposed to be. That was the Great Commission to
Yeah.
go forward.
Absolutely. Now, we don't hold the office of apostle, but we do carry on the functions of apostle in the sense that we get to go out and to share the good news. We're being sent. We come to church, we're being discipled. We leave this church, we're apostles. From disciples to apostles in the sense of our function, aren't we? And so the disciples went out sharing the good news of the kingdom of God to those who hadn't heard. Jesus is coming. Get ready. He's coming to your village tomorrow. Get ready for this. And then we do the same thing, don't we? Isn't that what we do? It should be doing. We tell people that don't know Christ, Christ is coming. Get ready. He'll be here, and preparing their hearts. What was their mission? Well, he gave them special authority that we don't have to heal the sick. Right? Now, if you held the office of apostle in the first century, you did some of those miraculous things, but now you don't you're not doing that, right? I mean, if you are, let me know. I have a hamstring that's giving me trouble recently. So, see me after church. I got this weird hamstring thing going on. But they were to go out and prepare for Christ's coming, weren't they? Look at the next slide. Let's get back to the text here. He said to them, now you remember this from last Sunday, he said to them, take nothing for your journey, no staff, nor bag. We'll go to the next slide there. Nor bread, nor money, and do not have 2 tunics. Now, I said this last Sunday morning, so I hope you were listening. He's sending these folks in Galilee, a very Jewish-friendly area. This is a bunch of Jewish believers in Galilee. You can see this is all Jewish towns, Cana, Nazareth, Nain, Tiberias, Capernaum, Chorazin, Gennesaret, all these Jewish towns. And he said, don't take with you extra sandwiches, don't take extra coats, don't take extra shoes. When you go, be prepared, he said, to depend upon the hospitality of the Jewish people in that area. That's very key to understand this, okay? Look at the next slide. Whatever house you enter, stay there and depart from there. So don't go from door to door begging. If somebody takes you in, you can stay for a few days, but don't overstay your welcome. Eat the food they give you. Be kind to the people that are hospitable to you. That's a cool name. Hospital, right? We don't think of hospitals as being places of hospitality, but they are. We're supposed to take care of folks who are in distress. That's what a hospital is. So be kind to those who are hospitable to you. Don't overstay your welcome. But he said, and wherever they do not receive you, this is very key here. If they don't take you into their towns, you go door to door in the town, they don't take you into their town. He said, when you leave that town, shake off the dust from your feet as a testimony against them. You've all heard this, shake the dust off your feet. We use it a lot of times, don't we? Well, I'm just upset with that local car dealership. I'm just going to shake my dust off my feet when I leave there, or whatever the case would be. It's your way of saying, I'm never coming back and do business with you. Well, Jesus said, when you go to a town and they don't accept you to stay anywhere in the town, then you shake the dust off your garments when you leave that town. Now, that is a very important historical context to this. Look at the next slide if we can here. In the Middle East, travelers would often arrive with their feet caked in dust, and hence foot washing was quite traditional. The Jews made this a theological and sacred issue, though. Now, so, in the days of open-toed shoes in the ancient world, traveling on very dusty roads and places, your feet got very dirty. And so it was very significant that when you arrived at a place, the servant of the house would often wash your feet. In the Last Supper, in the Gospel of John, it's Jesus who washes the disciples' feet, isn't it? It's interesting that he's the person who's the host of the meal. He takes off of his outer garment and sits down and kneels before them and washes their feet. Remember, who is first should be last. If you're gonna lead, you got to serve. He does by example. He shows he's going to serve them. Well, in the first century in the Middle East, travelers would get to a home. They would have their feet washed, or they have to find a place to wash their feet. Look at the next. So Jewish customs and traditional teaching believed that any land outside of Israel was defiling, or at least its dirt was. So anytime a Jewish person traveled outside of Israel, wherever he went in the world, when he came back to the borders, he would stop, stomp, knock the dust off of his garments, so as not to get the dirt from other Gentile lands into Israel. That's kind of silly, isn't it, Miss Glenn? I see you shaking your head like that's ridiculous. But the idea was that very dirt from Gentile lands was defiling, so you had to clean your feet off. And that was a Jewish custom. Look at the next slide here. This presumably caused some questions of conscience, a matter of conviction, and consternation for those Jews who were scattered. There were Jews living outside of Israel in that time who came in all over the world. And they said, well, we're good observant Jews. We come for Passover into Israel once a year. Do we got to wash the dirt off our feet too? We got to knock the dirt off our sandals and our cloaks? They said, yep. Even though you're a good observing Jew, it's still Gentile dirt in your shoes. That caused a lot of conflict, didn't they? You can imagine a Jew who's in a synagogue, a faithful attending a synagogue, say in Antioch, or somewhere far away, would come to observe a Jewish holiday and he'd have to shake his dirt off of his feet. That would be kind of insulting to him, but it was a custom that when he got back to Palestine or Israel, you had to do that. So that's an interesting thing. So Jews were to shake off any dust or dirt from outside lands when returning to Israel, or even off any imported fruit and food. So you'd have kosher food washings, right? The dust of a Gentile land was equivalent to defiling brought about by coming into contact with the corpse. It's almost like they said, it's just like eating a dead body, touching a corpse. If you eat food grown from grapes, grown from a Gentile area, didn't wash them off good. It's like eating a defiled, dirty animal. That's kind of a thought. Well, Jesus takes that Jewish custom of knocking the dust off of your feet, and he applies this to the areas in Galilee that don't accept him. Look at the next slide here. Shaking the dust from their feet was a prophetic stance. As the Jews had rejected the Messiah, he rejected them. So he said, now when you go to a town and they don't accept you in Galilee, these little towns in Galilee, when you leave, you get to the edge of the city and you shake the dust off when you walk out of that town. And as a prophetic curse in that town, you didn't accept the Messiah, he's turned his back on you. Now that's a horrible thing to think about, isn't it? But again, Jesus said it, not me. And he's saying, when they reject you, you reject them, right? When they reject the gospel, the good news of the kingdom, they're really rejecting God, aren't they? That's a way to think about that. So look at the next slide. After being driven out of the district, and I'll give you two examples in the book of Acts where this happened, if you're curious about this, how Paul applies this. After being driven out of the district of Poseidon and Antioch, Paul and Barnabas shook off the dust of their feet and protested against them. Acts 13. Paul does this twice. Acts 13, look at the second one he does this. After Paul wore out his welcome at the synagogue in Corinth, he shook out his garments and said to them, your blood be on your own heads. I'm clean. Acts 18. So twice in the book of Acts, Paul does the very exact same thing Jesus says to the disciples. When people reject you, what do? You burn down their synagogues? No. You blow up wherever No, you just go on down the road. Once you've given somebody the good news, the gospel, and they reject it wholeheartedly and definitively, and they don't even consider it, then you just do that. You sow the seed and give them the dirt back. You just get out of town. You say, that's enough. You're not going to accept the message of the good news of the gospel, then you pay the consequence for that. That's exactly what we're seeing here. Why? Because there's so many folks that haven't heard the gospel. I've said this before. Remember years ago when I was in Bible college, the slogan was, no man should hear the gospel twice, everybody's heard the gospel once. Meaning that there's a point where you stop casting your pearls before the swine. There's a point where you start shaking the dust off your feet. There's a point where you get down the road to the next person who wants to hear the gospel, whose heart's open to receive, rather than stay with the person who's not going to. You sow the seed and you move on. Does that seem offensive? This is what Jesus is saying here. There's a time to move on. Paul does it twice in the book of Acts. He says to these people, I've given you the good news. Your heart is hard. It's time to move down the road here. Look at the next slide if we can. Now, I want, again, give you the context for this. We're in Galilee. I put those little circles on the map to show you where they went outside of Canaan, the area, and still in Galilee. It says, and they departed and went through the villages, preaching the gospel and healing everywhere. Now, the word everywhere has to be understood in the place where he sent them. They didn't go to China or India at this point. They're just going to Galilee, just to Jewish-friendly communities, and that's where they're being sent to at this preaching crusade, just to Jewish-friendly areas, saying, Christ is coming, get ready. Now, I want to show you, so keep this in mind. He sends them to Jewish-friendly areas. If they don't accept, they're to shake the dust off and move on. If they accept, they stay 3 days and prepare them for the coming Messiah. Look at the next slide. Why were the Jews, the disciples who went out, those 12 disciples, to go materially unprepared? Why were they to go without extra shoes, extra sack of money, without any preparations? Why were they to go basically unprepared with material means? Who wants to take a stab at that?
They were going to other Jews.
Yeah, then they should have taken care of them, right?
Yeah.
So that's the reason why. Very good, Miss Sherry. Let's go to the next slide if we can. We'll keep this moving. Now this is the text. That was the introduction. This is the fire from heaven. Jewish area, you don't accept you, shake the dust off your feet, you move on. They accept you, stay 3 days, and preach the good news. Now here's the text for tonight. Luke chapter 9, verses 51 and following. When the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem. What do you think that means for him to be taken up? What do you think that's a reference to?
His ascension?
Maybe. Or his crucifixion. Okay. One of the two. But they probably all blur together, don't they? The crucifixion and the resurrection and the ascension probably all kind of blur. But you're right on. He's going to Jerusalem to die, isn't he? And to be taken up could be translated lifted up, which is a euphemism for the cross. Unless I be lifted up, I can't draw men to me. He says that. So we're probably talking about his death and the events that will take place in Jerusalem during the Passion Week, right? So Christ is heading, we're in the final stages of his ministry. He's now turned his face. This is the turning point in the book of Luke. He's now, from this point forward, it's all downhill toward the cross. He's looking toward the cross. Jesus and the disciples left Galilee and headed south toward Jerusalem. Now, I gave you the yellow dot in the north. That's where they were. That's where the preaching ministry took place with the disciples. They returned from the preaching. And they're now going to go south to Jerusalem. He set his face toward Jerusalem. They're now heading toward Jerusalem. But notice there's an area in between Galilee in the north and Judea in the south. That's a big chunk of land called Samaria. And you guys are somewhat familiar with Samaria. A couple of things about Samaria you should always be familiar with. Mount Gerizim was a place of worship. It was a high place of worship where the Jews often would worship from when they first came in the Promised Land. It's a natural, I think it was a walled fortress they used for worshiping there. But the temple gets moved from Gerizim down to Jerusalem at some point. We read in Sunday school class, Solomon builds a temple. They move the temple, then they move the head of worship to Jerusalem in the south there. Does anybody recall what happens at Sychar, Samaria in the Gospel of John? The woman at the well, very good. He meets a Samaritan woman at the well, and that goes pretty well for her, doesn't it? We see a Samaritan revival. She comes to faith in Christ. Come see a man who told me all that I've ever done wrong, right? The lady who had 5 husbands, was living with the guy who wasn't her husband, who'd been living in sin, and Jesus confronts her in the well in Samaria, and after he confronts her, she goes off and tells the village there she's met the Jewish Messiah. They come out and they meet Jesus. Some don't believe her because of her words, but when they meet Jesus, they believe. And a lot of Samaritans could have believed then. But this is an account where it doesn't go so well for the Samaritans. Christ comes back through their area. So they're traveling through. Now, any good self-respecting Jew would often go around Samaria because there are so many pagans in Samaria. He'd cross, we've mentioned this before, cross this side of the Jordan, bypass, go down this route here, and then cross back over about Jericho and then go to Jerusalem. Bypass Samaria. Now, why was that? During the Babylonian captivity in 586, when the Jews are carted off to Babylon, before they came back to settle in the land, some foreigners came in and settled in Samaria. It was a ethnically polluted area. There was intermingling among the races, Jews and Samaritans, and these people, and that's why it was. And so the Jews said they're just half-breeds, and they didn't like the Samaritans. So the Jew wouldn't even step on Samaritan soil. He'd go around that. Well, Jesus oftentimes doesn't acknowledge that custom. He goes through Samaria. He takes the main road through Samaria. In fact, in Gospel of John, it says in the chapter 4, when he meets the Samaritan woman, he says, he must need go through Samaria. Why? Because he's going to meet this lady at the well. She doesn't know, but he knows. He meets her at the day. Now, we're going to see tonight, as they go from this great big, this Jesus crusade in the north, they're going to cut through Samaritan soil, head to Jerusalem, and they meet some Samaritans along the way. So here's what happens. Look at the next slide. And he sent messengers ahead of him who went and entered next slide, village of the Samaritans. It doesn't say which village. It's a village somewhere in this big area. To make preparations for him. Again, same marching orders. You go now, it's not to the Jews in Galilee, but now it's to the Samaritans in Samaria. Same thing. I'm going to be at the town tomorrow in your village, and you tell them that I'm going to stop in and preach. Be there ready to hear the good news of the kingdom, right? Look what happens. Look at the next slide here. But the people did not receive him, Jesus, because his face was set toward Jerusalem. Now, why is that? Realizing that this Jesus was a Jewish Messiah and thus determined to go to Jerusalem, they rejected him. He would not delay in his mission for the cross. So what's happening here is he tells the disciples, I'm coming through your town tomorrow. I'm going to stay just long enough to preach. I'm moving on. I've got to get to Jerusalem. And in their ears they heard, oh, this is a Jewish man, a Jewish Messiah. He's got no real time for us. He's going to be a Jewish king, whatever that was going through their mind. And they turn him away. They reject him. They say, then tell him not to stop. If he ain't going to stay, he has no concern for us, tell him not even to stop here. Look at the next slide. And when his disciples, James and John, that's sons of Zebedee, sons of thunder is their nickname, sons of thunder. We talked a minute ago in the meeting here that men in coal mines have nicknames, David. Yours is Goo Goo, is that right? You said that before. One guy you mentioned that was Big Dumb. Is that right? What a cool nickname, Big Dumb. I don't know who Big Dumb was, but it doesn't seem like he's too bright of a guy. But I wouldn't say it to his face because he sounds kind of big at the same time. So Everybody's got nicknames. Well, the nicknames of these two disciples were the sons of thunder, right? And we don't know why they're called sons of thunder. I suspect it's because their mama was. And I say that because in the Gospels, she goes to Jesus and says, grant one of my sons to sit on your left and one to sit on the right in your coming kingdom. She's the one who's all noise. That's what thunder is noise. Thunder don't kill anybody. Lightning kills people, right? The daddy was lightning. The mama was the thunder. She's all noise, right? That's me reading in the Bible. Forgive me for that. She's the thunder. Sons of thunder. So the sons of thunder saw it and they said, Lord, do you want us to tell fire to come down from heaven and consume them? Think about that. They rejected. Now let me ask you the question. They rejected the coming news of the coming Messiah. What were they supposed to do when they were rejected? What were they supposed to do? Shake the dust off their feet. Isn't there a big leap from shaking the dust off their feet to call down fire from heaven? It's a gigantic leap, isn't it? They were thinking Sodom and Gomorrah and brimstone and fire from heaven and exploded by leveling, making a crater, right? And Jesus said, no, if they reject you, just shake the dust off your feet and move on peacefully. And they said, Jesus, we've been healing the sick and the things you ask us to do. Think we should call some fire down on the Samaritans? A big ball of fire and knock the whole village out? But, look at the next verse. But he turned and rebuked them. He gets on to them, scolds them pretty hard. And they went on to another village. He doesn't call fire down from heaven, does he? Maybe, it doesn't say in the text, maybe he just said, let's just go on. Let's just shake the dust and move on from this village to the next one. We've got to assume that's what happened because we've got no historical evidence, no biblical evidence that shows that any Samaritan town became a fiery furnace and a ball of ashes. We assume that they just moved on peacefully. Jesus, again, he's focused toward the cross. They reject him. He goes to the next Samaritan town until he gets eventually to Jerusalem where he's going to be crucified. We've got a couple of questions and we'll close this out tonight. What upset Jesus? What upset him that he was so concerned here in these verses? Isaac, what got him so upset? I see you got a good answer here.
Not because the sons of thunder wanted to basically nuke them.
Right, that's right. They were calling for a nuclear war on the Samaritan village, these sons of thunder. Call down, they should have called down lightning, it'd been more appropriate, wouldn't it? So they're calling, that's right, all-out nuclear war, right, on this Samaritan village. Why does it upset Jesus so much? Why do you think he's upset by the disciples?
Because they act like children.
Yeah. They got their feelings hurt, didn't they? You go to share the gospel with somebody, they shut the door in your face. They don't reject you. They're rejecting Jesus, aren't they? Don't get your feelings hurt. If you came there with good intentions, with the gospel, with the good news of Christ, don't be upset when they say no. They don't reject you ultimately. It's Christ they reject. And that's what Jesus is saying here. Let's just keep moving. Don't be babies about this, guys. They're going to reject you. They're not going to come by. If you go knocking on some stranger's door, if that's how you want to share the gospel, please do it. But know that 9 times out of 10, they're going to shut the door in your face. Or they may talk to you, lie to you. I'll be there next Sunday with no intentions to just get you off their porch. 9 times out of 10, you're not going to produce a lot of fruit by knocking on doors, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't because there's 10% time that it will. You're more likely to get somebody to come to church if you'll just persistently wear them out, right? And meet them at work and say, come on down, we'd love to have them. You make friends with people.
But you're not supposed to go back and kill them either.
Oh, right. Don't go to trouble to get the firearm out of your truck and then go confront them, right? Or pray that God sends a fireball into the roof of their house or something. Yeah. You just kind of move on along, don't you? I think you sow a seed, you're patient, you get rejected and say it's Christ they reject ultimately. What did the sons of thunder suggest they do? Of course, they suggested that a fireball come down from heaven. Okay, let's go to the next slide if we can here. What did Jesus suggest the disciples do to people who refuse the gospel? We said that, shake the dust off the feet. And how is this radically different from the disciples' request? Well, they weren't looking for mercy, were they? They were not being considerate or patient or kind to those who reject the gospel. They were looking to get their feelings vindicated, weren't they? They've been hurt and upset. Well, I hope that explains why Christ got so upset. He's about to go die for people. He didn't come on a jihad to kill people. He came to die for people. He could have called fire from heaven to blow up every Jewish city that rejected him, couldn't he? He doesn't do that. Instead, he goes to the cross and he even dies for those folks who put him on the cross, which is a radical way of looking at that. Any thoughts we close this out tonight, guys? I mean, it doesn't hurt for you to pray fire from heaven if you want to do that, but God may not answer that prayer. He might say that's not the best thing.
It's kind of strange. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's just me. But when through the Jewish communities.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he told them, and they did, just shake off their sandals and go. But when they come to this particular
yes.
town,
Yeah, a Samaritan town.
wait a minute, we're just going to blow the smithereens out of them and forget about it.
Yes, and that's probably because they had some racial prejudice against the Samaritans. They probably had a bent toward not liking Samaritans anyway. So the Jews they could tolerate because they were kindreds and they were brothers, right? But when they came to these half-breed Samaritans, they had no tolerance for being rejected by them. Thanks for pointing that out. The difference between being Galilee or Samaria, how they handle the rejection. Yeah. And Paul does it. Paul does it to Jewish synagogues in Corinth. He does it twice. He does it at the synagogue there in Sidon, Antioch. So Paul will do it. It's the same, the Apostle Paul, that says, one sows, one waters, and one reaps. And I forgot, he gave names. I sowed, and Barnabas watered, and such reaps. Paul realizes that when you sow the gospel seed, it's kind of beyond your control. You put the good news in people's hands, and they respond or not. Okay. Anything else? Well, let's close out in prayer, then we'll